I never imagined I'd be the one to cross a line, even a small, harmless one. But here I was, caught in a moment where something innocent could quickly evolve into something more intriguing. It all began on an otherwise ordinary Thursday. My husband, Mark, and I had recently moved to a new town. Although we loved the house, the move itself had been exhausting for both of us. We were often too tired to explore the area or engage socially, and even Mark, usually easygoing, seemed distant. One evening, after another quiet dinner filled with more silence than conversation, I settled down to check my phone. That's when I saw a familiar name, Daniel. He was an old friend from college, back when life felt simpler, and everything seemed fresh and exciting. We'd stayed in touch loosely over the years, occasionally catching up online, but it had been ages since we'd seen each other. Feeling a wave of nostalgia, I sent him a quick message just to say hello. It didn't take long before he responded, and soon we were reminiscing about the old days, laughing at silly memories. Before I knew it, I found myself telling him about our move and how isolated we'd been feeling. Daniel replied almost immediately, suggesting that he could drive down for a visit. "It's been forever, and I'd love to meet Mark," he wrote. I hesitated, realizing that a visit from Daniel might be just a change we needed to shake up the quiet routine of our new home. But there was something inside me, a small voice, that felt uneasy about it. Inviting him over felt like it could disrupt something fragile. Still, the excitement of reconnecting with an old friend seemed like exactly the kind of energy we needed. So I shared a message with Mark and asked if he'd be open to having Daniel over for the weekend. Mark shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sure, sounds good. We could use some company." With that, I invited Daniel to come over that weekend. As I pressed send, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was unknowingly stirring up something unknown. Daniel arrived on Friday afternoon, his smile as warm and familiar as I remembered. But there was a new sense of charm and confidence about him. He greeted me with a hug, and we exchanged quick glances, surprised at how easily we slipped back into our old rhythm. Mark came out to meet him, and after a brief introduction, they started talking like old friends, bonding over college stories, work, and life in general. The evening passed quickly as we sat together, catching up over dinner in the backyard. The air was filled with laughter, stories, and a warmth that had been missing from the house for a while. Mark seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in weeks, and Daniel's light-hearted energy brought out a side of him I'd missed. It felt like a breath of fresh air, almost as if the weight of the past few months was lifting. After dinner, the three of us moved to the porch to watch the sunset. As the sky darkened, the air turned cooler, and we moved inside, settling into the cozy living room with cups of tea, continuing our conversation about everything from music to books to old college antics. I couldn't help but notice how easily Daniel fit into our space, filling it with energy and laughter that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in a long time. At one point, when Mark went to grab another round of drinks, Daniel turned to me with a soft smile and said, "You know, you seem happy here, but I can't help but notice a little restlessness in your eyes." His words caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to deny it, to tell him everything was fine, but something in his gentle expression made me pause. "It's complicated," I finally said. I struggled to find the right words, trying to explain how we were happy, but something felt off, like we were stuck in place. "It's hard to put into words," I began. "We're fine, but things just feel stagnant, I guess." Daniel nodded thoughtfully, his gaze unwavering. "Sometimes a change in pace can make all the difference," he replied, his voice calm and understanding. "I'm here for both of you, for whatever you need." Before I could respond, Mark returned with the drinks, and I quickly brushed off the odd feeling that had settled between us. The night went on, but that brief exchange lingered in my mind. It was as if Daniel had picked up on something I hadn't yet acknowledged myself. As the evening wound down, Mark thanked Daniel for coming, and I echoed his gratitude before heading to bed. Daniel caught my eye as I was leaving, offering me a soft smile, almost as though he knew there was more beneath the surface that we hadn't addressed. Lying beside Mark later that night, I found myself wide awake, my thoughts drifting back to Daniel's words, the warmth in his voice, and how easily he seemed to understand me. I tried to shake off the thoughts, reminding myself that Daniel was here as a friend, just a friend. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling that his presence was stirring something deeper within me. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Daniel was eager to spend the day exploring with us, and we decided to take a scenic hike nearby, something Mark and I had wanted to do for a while but never seemed to find the energy for. With Daniel's enthusiasm, we packed up some snacks and set out early. The hike was beautiful, the air crisp and invigorating. For the first time in a long while, I felt fully present, away from the daily grind. Mark and Daniel chatted easily, joking about everything from Mark's college days to Daniel's latest travel adventures. Watching them bond brought me a quiet sense of joy, though I noticed that, now and then, Daniel's gaze would drift to me with a warmth I hadn't felt in ages. Halfway through the trail, we stopped to rest by a lookout point with a stunning view of the valley. As we admired the scenery, Daniel leaned in closer, his voice low enough that Mark couldn't hear. "It's good to see you like this," he said, his eyes searching mine. "You seem free." The word hit me unexpectedly, sending a shiver down my spine. I wanted to deny it, brush it off, but he was right. I felt more alive than I had in a long time, and his presence seemed to bring something out of me, something I hadn't realized I was missing. I glanced at Mark, who was busy taking pictures, unaware of the quiet moment between Daniel and me. "I didn't realize how much I missed this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Daniel's hand brushed against mine. Just a brief, almost imperceptible touch, but it felt heavy with unspoken meaning. Neither of us said anything aloud, but the weight of the moment hung between us. A flash of guilt flickered inside me, yet I didn't pull away. Just then, Mark turned back toward us, smiling, and I quickly withdrew my hand, feeling my cheeks flush. We continued the hike in silence, and I kept my distance from Daniel, reminding myself that he was just a friend, nothing more. Later that evening, Mark suggested we play a game of cards to wind down. We gathered around the kitchen table, laughing at silly bets and teasing one another. But every time Daniel's eyes met mine, I felt a spark, an unspoken connection that both thrilled and unsettled me. When the game ended, Mark went off to shower, leaving Daniel and me alone at the table. The silence between us felt thick, as if there were things neither of us dared to say. Finally, Daniel broke the quiet. "I don't want to overstep," he said softly, "but I just want you to know I'm here. Whatever you're going through, whatever you need." "I'm here," Daniel said softly, his words hanging in the air. I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak, feeling the weight of his offer settle deep within me. My heart raced, tangled with emotions I couldn't quite untangle. I knew he meant it kindly, that he genuinely cared, but there was a part of me that wondered if this was a line I shouldn't cross. Just then, Mark returned, his cheerful demeanor unaware of the tension that had built up in his absence. He wrapped me in a hug, and I felt Daniel's eyes on us, watching. I tried to shake off the strange feelings that were stirring inside me, but as the evening progressed, it became clear this wasn't something I could easily ignore. Sunday morning arrived with a bittersweet feeling that seemed to settle over the house. Daniel would be leaving later that day, and even though we'd only spent a few days together, his presence had cracked open something between Mark and me. That morning, we had breakfast in a quiet, comfortable silence, as if all of us could sense the unspoken tension but didn't know how to address it. Mark, ever the laid-back one, suggested we take one last walk around the neighborhood before Daniel left. As we strolled down the tree-lined streets, a peaceful quiet fell over us, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we returned home, Daniel began packing his things, and Mark offered to take him to the train station. While Mark gathered his bags, Daniel looked at me, his gaze lingering, a mix of sadness and understanding. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. As they headed for the door, I followed, feeling like there was something left unsaid, something I needed to confront. But before I could speak, Mark and Daniel were already in the car, Mark waving cheerfully as they drove off. I stood there, watching them disappear down the road, feeling an odd combination of relief and longing, unsure of what to make of it all. When Mark returned an hour later, he found me sitting on the couch, lost in thought. He sat down beside me, his expression gentle and knowing, as though he could sense the storm of emotions brewing within me. "Daniel's a good guy," Mark said, breaking the silence. "I'm glad he came. It was nice to have someone remind us of who we were back then, maybe even what we've been missing." His words surprised me, and I looked up at him, noticing a vulnerability in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I know things have fell off between us," Mark continued, his voice softer now. "Maybe we needed someone to remind us of what we have, of why we're together." A tear slipped down my cheek as I reached for his hand, the weight of his words settling in. We both knew that distance had been growing between us, something we had ignored, brushed off as just part of the chaos of life. But now, sitting together, it felt like we were seeing each other for the first time in months. As we sat there holding hands, I realized that Daniel's visit had led us to a crossroads. His presence had forced me to confront parts of myself I had long avoided, emotions I'd tucked away. But in the end, it wasn't Daniel I needed. It was Mark, the man who had stood by me through it all, even when things felt uncertain. That night, as we shared a quiet dinner, there was a new warmth between us, a renewed sense of connection that had been missing for too long. I understood then that sometimes it takes an unexpected spark to reignite the flames that had quietly dimmed. As we cleared the table, a sense of peace washed over me, knowing that Mark and I had found our way back to each other. Though Daniel had stirred things up, it was Mark who held my heart.